He threw a leg across that iron horse and pulled the throttle down. A million things rushing through his mind like that rumbling sound. Living life in his own eyes, direction isn't clear. So searching all these years.
Welcome everyone, this is Pastor Ski from the Rushing Wind Biker Church, and this is Answers from Mars Hill, a show where we have conversations about things that you might be curious about in the faith of Christianity, trying to help you understand a Christian perspective of things from the reality of what our religion or our faith really is about, and try to get rid of some misconceptions about this faith that I've given my life to. We're in the middle of a conversation, and actually this is the final episode of a conversation of, in the Christian faith, we view God as a good God, a loving God, and it's hard sometimes for people to look around the world, seeing the human condition, what's going on with evil and wars and disease and terrorism and all these things that go on. And how can we actually view that God is good? How could God be good in a world that just seems so out of control and so evil? And so over the last 2 weeks, we've kind of laid a foundation and got a little more involved last week as far as how we got to where we are, and how everything boiled down to one bad decision of bringing evil into the world, and how one bad decision led to thousands and hundreds and millions of more bad decisions that has brought us through history to where now we're just in a world that is full of selfishness, full of violence, full of disease, full of chaos, full of natural disasters, just all kinds of genetic anomalies. And how could God be good, and how come he doesn't step in and right everything? And we spoke last week a little bit about how God gave us the gift of free will, and so much of what goes on and much of what we face in this life came from free will decisions that we made throughout the millennia, whether it was veering off into a realm of evil and selfishness, leading to I mentioned the first murder was only one generation out of the first human beings, and how little by little, generation to generation, more darkness, more pain, more brokenness came into our existence, and also how the world was being populated all over through civilizations, cultures, and people that aren't addressed in the Bible. But there was no moral compass. There was no divine or some kind of thought process to try to discover what was right, what was wrong, what is moral, what is immoral, and God was having a conversation with man every so often, and would have one man, then another man, and we talked about how man was evil all the time. It was just really going to all break down, and we would eventually eliminate ourselves if God didn't step in. We spoke last week about the flood, how God decided he was going to end this project, and thank God there was one man who had kept a relationship with God, developed kind of a closeness, and for the sake of one man, he kept this going and eliminated everyone else except his family. And I spoke about last week just the scientific discovery of why we are the way we are in this environment, with disease, brokenness, natural disasters, and I mentioned that when this planet was created, according to what we believe and what is in the scriptures, there was a protective covering on the earth, and when that was broken, because when this flood came, it was a protective moisture blanket, a cloud covering, so to speak, that kept us in kind of a tropical environment up until then. And when the flood came, all the moisture, all the humidity, everything that was there to protect us came flooding down to create this massive flood with the water that came up out of underground streams that was naturally watering all the vegetation. And so now much of the protections we have environmentally was gone. The death and the decaying of all the humanity and all the animal life, the vegetation, everything. So decaying of that created diseases, brought in all kinds of things to our realm. And so we see after Noah, lifespan went down. Also violence increased. And we see that that man has also shifted at that point to even become a carnivore. According to what the scriptures say, we actually didn't become meat eaters till after that flood. And so we got to the point last week where we came to this man Abraham, and God has always wanted to redeem what we had done to this planet, to ourselves, to this creation. And so he had sent one man and another man, and then one day there was a man named Abraham that God decided to create an avenue of recreating a tribe or a nation and giving them the information to try to redeem health, try to redeem culture, try to redeem just humanity, and try to help us get back on track as best we could, considering our environment had totally changed. And so God interacted with a man named Abraham, and over time, through Abraham, giving him information, giving him even scientific discovery, health codes that came down through Moses and the law, that God was constantly downloading information to us that we could use to start to not redeem what we had done to this planet and ourselves, but to try to navigate and create a healthier experience, to get as close as we could to what would be the divine plan, even though now we were in an environment that has really broken down and affected us physically, affected our planet. As I mentioned, when that flood came down and took all the protections off, and all that water now is absorbed into the earth, creating oceans and rivers and seas and what we see out there today. It also shifted the earth itself. As all this came down, we know there's plates that shift for earthquakes, and when the water came down, high places came up, and a lot of what was the perfection of this planet was corrupted by that one main event. And since then, God has tried to give us information little by little by little to help us live longer, live better, have a community that could coexist with each other in more peace and love and serving, and a more communal type of environment where culture would be about the community and getting rid of some of the selfishness and things that we just know are part of our inherent broken human experience to this day. And even through the kosher laws, which we touched on a little bit last week, God gave us early health codes: what could be eaten, what shouldn't be eaten, just for health reasons. A lot of people they kind of mock things in the Bible and say God doesn't want us to have shrimp and pork and bacon and all kinds of things. But when you really, even from a health standpoint and understanding of how different types of animals and creatures just are inherent to absorbing contaminants from this environment. We know that pork has had certain issues with trichinosis and things, and we have to cook it more than other types of meat. We know that shrimp has mercury in its vein, and other shellfish that pick up things on the bottom because of sediment. And so when we look at kosher laws and kosher ways of doing things, they were really early health codes to help us live longer, not get some of the diseases, some of the things that were part of this really polluted environment we lived in now. Also, health codes that God handed down through Moses and through the Levitical law of washing procedures, how to take garbage out of the camp, how to take human excrement out of the camp and taking it so far so that, the diseases and the bacteria and things that just build up in those things would be far from the communal places of gathering. Also, quarantine rules came in through God, through the laws of Moses and the traditions of the Jews, and something that was not heard of at that time, and really other cultures that they didn't have that information. So we see a lot of other cultures around the world had many more health issues, many more cultural breakdowns than the Jewish nation, because God was constantly trying to give us the information to kind of redeem some semblance of the goodness of what this human experience was intended to be right from the beginning. And so historically, the Jews were by far the healthiest culture in the world for these reasons, particularly in ancient times, because God was constantly downloading and pouring information in that they didn't have any science, they didn't have all these medical facilities and testing to be able to do research to find out these things. And so we see, and we're going to continue to talk, how God, through humanity, has spoken through his people to help the human experience become less of what we see. And so he does care about our brokenness. He does care about disease and death and natural disasters and all these things. And when we come back, we're going to continue that conversation and just see a lot of ways that maybe you don't understand that God has intervened through people by giving us the information we need to have the best life that we can in what has become a broken world, a broken humanity, a broken culture, and just a broken universe. And so we'll be right back, and we'll continue the conversation after a few words from our sponsors.
Hey everybody, this is Motorcycle Mike, the personal injury lawyer. I've been riding motorcycles my entire adult life. During the course of my 30-year career as a lawyer, I've also represented countless injured motorcyclists. If you're one of them, I can be of assistance to you. Go to my website, please, motorcyclemikeesq.com. I'll always be there for you. I'm on your side when you ride.
Welcome to Wolfman's Bike Alert. I'm Kenny the Wolfman Max, and right now I'm going to bring you a brand new jacket in for the ladies. An embroidered jacket that just hasn't been out yet. This is the first time. The Flying Angel and the ever popular Brando jacket. It's been around for 100 years and will be around for 100 more. I've got hundreds and hundreds in stock. Don't forget our large selection of sunglasses. I've got all types of jewelry, ladies biker jewelry, silver rings, hundreds of men's rings. We've got it all. Everything is here, right here. Wolfman's Bike Alert, 335 Smithtown Boulevard in Ronkonkoma. My phone number is 631-578-7877. 631-578-7877. Friday night again.
Welcome back to the show. Continue the discussion on on how God has not intervened, but is giving us information over time to help us navigate this broken humanity with information. I just left off before the break about kosher laws and health codes and different ways that God has given us information to live a little healthier life, a little better experience. Because we have to realize back then there was no FDA, no Health and Human Services Department, and so there was nothing to really inform or do any kind of research into this. Now, before I just want to sidetrack for a minute about one part of this conversation about God being a good God from a Christian perspective in a world that seems to have all kinds of evil, all kinds of hate speech, murder, terrorism. And so I want to address for a moment, quickly, some people say that the Christian church has actually contributed to and actually been part of the evil in this world. And the thing that I want everybody to kind of understand is you can't legislate and you can't regulate or demand Christian character. You know, and the belief that we hold true when someone actually steps into their faith, there is a spiritual transformation that occurs if this is a real thing. So character changes, people change. And so over history, you'll see there are a lot of movements of evil, such as Nazi Germany, such as the Ku Klux Klan, groups like the Westboro Baptist Church that are filled with hate speech. And you have to kind of look through this and understand that just because someone puts a cross in front of a movement or in front of a church, it doesn't make them a valid Christian experience. And it doesn't make them someone who is a disciple of Jesus. And it's something that, you know, where you struggle with conversations with people when they start to bring up, you know, certain things that are done by religious movements around the world. And then they say, well, you know, look at the history of your own faith. And I really live in the reality and an understanding that not everything that has been called a Christian movement in history has been a Christian movement. Not everything that is done or said to be done for the furtherance of the gospel is actually something that would be technically part of what Jesus would have said to do as his followers. And that is really the filter that everything should be run through in order to investigate what the Christian faith is, to what we who call ourselves true disciples of Jesus hold dear, and see what Jesus said about how we are supposed to move in this world, loving people, caring for people. And some of the things that have been done in the name of Christ have nothing to do with what this man that would be God came to show us. Again, this is from the perspective of the Christian faith, trying to explain, not to proselytize or convert, but just to explain the reality that what you see is not all what it is. And so, you know, do some investigating, find out before you attack our faith, and say, well, God can't be all about being good, all about, you know, helping and serving and not killing and everything when all these things are going on. You know, do your due diligence. You know, do some investigating if you actually care about what is right and what is wrong. And so I just wanted to mention that for a minute or two. But I wanted to move into how God has actually moved through humanity. As I mentioned, he's not going to come in and take our free will decision away, because that's something that would undercut the very reason why he put us here, the very reason why he established and reestablished a community and a nation, and eventually through, you know, what Jesus did, a people that could step into the life that we were meant to live, but to understand that God has always been there working through man and culture to help us to live longer, be better, be more productive. You know, the first thing is we look at medical care, how it has been brought into this humanity, and we look all the way back into really the Council of Nicaea back in 325, where the Christian Church mandated every town that was supposed to have a cathedral would also have a hospital. The expansion and the multiplication of the hospital system was really designed, perpetrated, and really enacted by the Christian Church, whether it was Catholic Health Services, you know, we know New York Presbyterian, things that we have in New York, and there are Christian organizations, hospitals all over the world. And when you start to think about the things that Jesus taught about God really caring, he was really creating a movement of compassion, of love, of mercy, of healing, of teaching, and deliverance, and all really the motives that facilitate healthcare, about having compassion, trying to help people through infirmity, through sicknesses, through accidents. And so the very heart of God really brought up men and entrepreneurs and people who were inspired to start to build up a health system and a hospital system that could help us to start to redeem some of this life. And you know, this all comes through as we look at really as our faith, something that God's Spirit puts in us to actually care about humanity, to actually want to help, want to heal, want to fix. And we look at much of the world, and we look at things outside of the cultures that had some kind of Christian influences, and much of it is still survival of the fittest, caste system. And so even today, when we look around the world, a lot of the cultures that haven't been affected by Christianity, you know, you'll see that there are caste systems. There's things that just don't go on, and they allow the breakdown of health, the breakdown of just violence and things that they don't have the safeguard. They don't have the spiritual influence that really came through the movement of Christianity. You know, there was a British author, Malcolm Muggeridge, who traveled the world, and he said, "I've spent a number of years in India and Africa, where I found much righteous endeavors undertaken by Christians of all denominations. But I've never, as it happens, come across a single hospital or an orphanage run by a socialist or a humanist organization or movement." And that really kind of is a powerful statement of how the movement of God to help humanity has really gone through all of culture, all over the world, with just how can we have a better humanity. But also the movement of God is also in a large way responsible for much of the education, colleges, universities, because again, God was not going to take our free will away, but he was going to keep downloading information and helping us educate ourselves so that we could live a better life within a broken world, within a broken humanity. You know, the most premier universities and oldest in the world were through the men who had visions, and they were men of faith to better humanity through knowledge, through wisdom, through medicine, and through science. You know, from the oldest universities of Bologna, Italy, which was formed in, I think, 1088 AD, to Oxford, Salamanca, Spain, Cambridge, England, and Ivy League schools like Harvard. They originally were made to educate the clergy, and then they combined that with sciences and science and faith. Princeton, whose crest still reads Dei sub nomine viget, which means under God we flourish. And many colleges and universities here and around the world were founded by followers of Jesus Christ. You know, I think I mentioned before, even my alma mater, USC, University of Southern California, not what you would envision as a Christian university at all, was founded by the Methodist Church, and the original team was called the Methodists. And so we see God didn't abandon or forget about his humanity, but he would help and give us the inspiration, the spirit, information to maximize this world we live in. The life that we have, trying to redeem some of the brokenness, some of the corruption that has happened because of what we've done to this planet, what we've done to ourselves, how the human condition and just the human mindset from that first really act of defiance and disobedience has brought hate, killing, not caring, disease, evil, suffering, ego, pride, and all those things, when you really put them together, creates all the tension, all the wars, much of the suffering that we see in this world. And so God is still active, and God is still working to try to redeem what's going on in the world. But he's not going to take away our free choice. And so after this next commercial break, I'm going to talk a little more on this subject, but also how life has meaning, that without God, all this suffering would be meaningless. And so when we come back from the words from our sponsors, I want to shift into this thought of, is there a meaning to life?
Hi, my name is Sharon Gillette, and I'm the owner of One Stitch at a Time. I've been doing this since I'm 9 years old, but it became full-time when my husband was diagnosed with cancer several years ago. And I never went back to work because I wanted to take care of him. I feel what makes me stand out is that I care. I take a personal interest in your project. I take the time to find your correct fit and treat you like a friend, not just a customer. So whether it's embroidery, making patches, printing shirts, doing alterations and repairs, or bringing your ideas to life, you can call me at 631-428-1245 or visit my website at www.onestitchatatime.co.
Welcome back to the show. So as I finished off really explaining that a lot of the innovations and things that have happened through the history of humanity, whether it's hospitals, medicine, education, that really started and was promoted more so within the faith community of Christianity, and a lot of our hospital systems and universities actually were started by people with faith in Jesus Christ to help us know more, have more wisdom, help more. It's kind of easy to see that God has been with us for hundreds of years, and there are many things that we can be thankful for, even in a world that's filled with dark things, with suffering and tragedy. But the problem is we're still stuck in this place of suffering. There's still evil. we try to process it, but sometimes it's hard. You know, the worst thing is sometimes everything seems to be so meaningless, just a waste of humanity. And we all have to find a way to navigate through this dark world, you know, losing people that we love too soon, losing people in accidents. You know, being part of the motorcycle community, you know, I lose many friends, many acquaintances, even people in my family. And so we face a lot of loss, which seems, you know, meaningless when you have nothing to process it through. And how do you try to keep your head screwed on right? How do you try to keep a good perspective? I mean, a very close friend of mine, I think 2.5 years ago, was killed in a motorcycle accident. Very close friend. You know, I've known him for years. I was blessed to be the one to do his wedding, baptized him into this Christian faith, and unfortunately, I also got to speak at his funeral, and you know, just a meaningless motorcycle accident. You know, somebody who was high on drugs and wasn't paying attention, and he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so how do you process these kind of things, you know, sickness and cancer, multiple sclerosis, on and on and on, drug addictions, overdoses, mass shootings, terror attacks, wars and wars and wars. And how do you make sense of it all? Is it useless? Is it meaningless? You know, you have a friend, you have a relative, you're close together, and all of a sudden one day, you know, you turn around and they're gone. Sometimes it could seem a little bit meaningless. And so there's so many things out there you can believe or not believe. We're all going to have to face loss, tragedy, suffering, pain, grief. You know, we're really all in this humanity together. You know, it doesn't matter if we're a Christian or Jews or Muslim or atheists, agnostics, Buddhists, Hindu, spiritualists. None of us is exempt from this human dilemma, from the corruption of everything around us. And with all that that God has poured into humanity to try to help this fallen world, so we can try to care for ourselves. You know, what do you do when you're a victim in this life? You know, what then? I mentioned about my sister, that she had gone into a coma when she was 4 years old and been in kind of that state for going on 43 years. And something happens and you're left trying to sort it all out. You're still here left in the aftermath of everything that's going on. And maybe you try to drink and numb the pain, but you wake up the next day and nothing's really changed. You know, your life can end up being defined by a never-ending grieving, mourning, a dark cloud every day, every week, every year. What do you do about that? You know, and on top of all that, you turn the television on, and you have the news, you have cable, you have the internet, and constant tragedy, constant evil, and just, you know, how do you process all these things? And, you know, as a Christian, you know, we struggle with the same things. You know, God, where are you? How can life go on? How can life be good again? You know, God, you knew this would happen. And you start to think, I'll never be the same. You know, what the heck is this all about? Is it really all meaningless? And all you have is what you see and what you have. And sometimes it looks just so meaningless. And if you don't believe there's a God, or if you don't believe God's interested or actually intervenes, really you're left with a state of, yeah, this is pretty much all meaningless. I don't know how to do that. It has to rip the heart right out of you. I just don't understand how you can process all the darkness in this world without having some kind of faith, something that'll give you an understanding. And so I want to spend the rest of my time in this segment, in the final segment, speaking from a Christian perspective, from the way I look at things, being a believer and a follower of Jesus Christ, and maybe give you an understanding of why we feel what we've given our life to is not just true, but it's so beneficial to try to process, still have a good life when everything around you seems so meaningless. And so it's not about what a denomination taught you about this faith. It's not really about going to church. It's not really about doing the stuff, taking your sacraments, being a good person. There's a lot more to this faith than that. You know, there's a level within this faith where you actually develop a relationship with the one who has really created not just everything, but you also. And so, trying to understand from that perspective, what I try to do and what I'm going to try to do with the rest of this program is strip down this faith, the truth of it, what Jesus did, what faith in him does, and what it gives me and people who believe like me to be able to process this world gone mad, to kind of understand who he was. And so, as I mentioned, as far as the name of the show, the Apostle Paul on Mars Hill, I want to explain part of our faith just to have you understand why we can process these things maybe a little easier than people that don't have this faith, and in kind of in a sense, explain the unknown God that Paul was explaining to those people in Athens, Greece. Maybe some things you haven't heard before, because God is a good God. God does care, and he does intervene, and he does get involved, and he does send. And you don't have to believe what I believe, what we believe. I'm just here to try to explain to you why I believe what I believe, and what has gotten me through an extraordinary dark life. You all have what you have, and God bless you all. I love you, and you're going to give your life to whatever you feel is best for you. All I know is what I've experienced and what has been shown to me, and just explain, my faith really started to get challenged when my sister, not just when she had her illness and went into a coma, but when it lingered year after year after year after year, and put me in a place where I have the same questions, really in an intense way that maybe most of you have out there. Very angry. I didn't even understand the faith that I thought that I had, and so many questions that I felt went unanswered, and trust issues. And I think that's what keeps many people from even thinking about seeking any kind of God, any kind of relationship with God, is trust issues. There's so much craziness out there. There's so many things, and I don't even know what to believe. All I know is what I see out there is tragic. Everything around the world just looks like it's going to hell in a handbasket. And how can we possibly think there is some ultimate creator who is good, that is loving, that actually cares about me, cares about you, cares about this humanity? Where are you? Where is he? And I want to just end this segment after our next break about a story in the scriptures where Jesus is dealing with this very issue about where were you, God, when things went bad? Why weren't you there? Why did you let this happen? If you were really there, wouldn't this have been avoided? And I'm going to talk a little bit about the story in the Bible when a man named Lazarus dies, actually a very close friend of Jesus, and what ensues and what Jesus says to give us an idea of what life can be. And so when we come back, I'm going to finish up this whole conversation on a good God in a hard world. So we'll see you after these words from our sponsors.
Hey everybody, this is Motorcycle Mike, the personal injury lawyer. In addition to representing injured motorcyclists for over 30 years now, during that same time, I've represented countless car crash victims and construction workers injured on construction sites. If you need my assistance, go to my website, motorcyclemikeesq.com. I will always be there for you.
This is Pastor Ski, and I want to tell you about two books that I've written, The Fear of Life and No Sting. The Fear of Life is my journey of faith and how I lived in fear for close to 35 years and how God took me out of it. No Sting is about my battle with cancer and my victory through God over it. And if you're interested in any of these books, go to barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, and also zulonpress.com. Go to the bookstore. And again, I want to thank you for your support. Welcome back to the show. This is the last segment of the last show of this three-part series on how could God be good in a world that has seemed so bad. When I left off before the last break, I was mentioning that I'm going to now go into the Bible for a moment in this last segment and kind of give you an understanding of what really creates the Christian mindset on how we process the hard things of the world, the bad things of the world, the tragic things of the world, and kind of show you through the lens of our faith why I think it's the best filter, the best grasp of understanding, and to help us have peace and just even joy in our life when so many things have gone wrong. So I mentioned the story in the Bible when a man named Lazarus, who actually is a close friend of Jesus, when Jesus would come into Jerusalem, he would stay at this house, and it was Mary and Martha, and Lazarus was their brother. And so word comes to Jesus that Lazarus is sick and he's dying, and then word eventually comes that he is has actually died. And the challenging part of the story and the I guess irony of sometimes you see how Jesus moves in his stories and in how he addresses things. He actually waits another 2 days to head to Lazarus' house. And the reason being is there was a superstition with the Jews at that time that the spirit didn't leave the body until the person was dead for 3 days. And so Jesus actually made a point of getting there the 4th day so that they couldn't account for what was going to transpire with any of their superstition, that it was past the point of no return. And so Jesus comes to the city where they are, and met by Martha and Mary, the brothers of this now dead man Lazarus, who's already been put in a tomb. And so in the Gospel of John, chapter 11, verse 21, it says, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. Several verses later in the same chapter, it says, therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And I want you all to know Jesus hears our heart. He hears when our heart breaks. He hears our cries, our brokenness, our sorrow. You know, he hears all that, and he knows the state of this humanity, and he cries with every one of us. And so in that chapter, chapter 11 of John's Gospel, it says, when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit, and he was troubled. I mean, how could he not be? His close friend has now been dead, and he sees the mourning of all the people that he knows, and the friends and his two sisters. And so Jesus said, where have you laid him? And they said, Lord, come and see. And then it says Jesus wept. You know, we kind of know that as the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. Because Jesus, he feels for our humanity. You know, being who we believe to be the Son of God who has always lived, he saw what humanity did to itself. And now he's living with us, seeing firsthand what death has done to this humanity. And so the scripture goes on to say the Jews were saying, see how much he loved him. But some of them said, you know, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man also from dying? You know, see, it's not that God doesn't care. God cares more than we really understand. But the next thing Jesus says is one of the most revealing things in his purpose, coming to our humanity to walk with us. And Jesus said to Martha, he said, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. It's part of the faith. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and I am the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. And then he says, do you believe this? And so this is the core of what the Christian faith is all about, is that life is much more than we see. There's a spiritual life that we all live. And that spiritual life, from the filter and the core of the Christian faith, is a life that never ends. You know, it's a spiritual life in our soul that continues, and this is the core of faith in Jesus Christ, and why he came to redefine what death and life is. See, faith in that moment in history defined or redefined what life was. And it informs how we look at the dark things of life as people who are followers, as something much bigger, something much longer, something much better. You know, we have an assurance when we truly come into this faith. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of people who say they're Christians, and you look at their life and there's really no evidence that they are, and people can call themselves what they want. But the truth and the power that comes from within this faith only comes when someone has actually stepped into the Christian faith wholeheartedly. And so we don't lose heart when hard things happen, because our life doesn't end here. That this is a small part of our existence, and our part here is really more purpose. And I've seen in my sister's life, and I've seen in the lives of many, including myself, that Many times, even most times, the purpose of someone's life actually becomes more profound when something comes into their life that we don't think is actually something that's a positive thing. And Paul, the apostle, talking about life and death, says we don't grieve like those who have no hope. Yes, we grieve. We love. We have friends. We have family. We have people we care about. We care about humanity when we see tragedy and we see these terrorist things that go on. But we have a hope that goes well beyond what we see. So we can rebound and we can process these things that are dark in this world, the things that happen to the people around us, the things that are happening. And we know there's a bigger thing going on. And, faith in all senses is a choice. Having that faith that Paul says that we don't grieve and we don't look at these tragedies, we don't look at the world from the same lens. Yes, we grieve and we hurt just like everyone else. But we know there's a hope that is more powerful than our pain. And there's a promise that's more permanent than our temporary suffering, which in the eternal is a very short amount of time. Actually, Paul says to the church in Corinth in 2 Corinthians 4:17 that our present troubles are small and they won't last very long. Yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. Every second of suffering, every second of pain, every second of sorrow and loss is doing something. It's doing something good in us. It's doing something good in a big picture. It's doing something good through you. And that's impossible to process out of this faith that we call Christianity. And maybe it'll give you a little better understanding of how we look at things. When you're walking in this faith and you're a disciple of Jesus, you can look in these situations and, you can say things are good, and that's a very hard statement that Paul just made, that the suffering is light and temporary. When I look at my sister, my mother and my father both died of cancer. I've had cancer. I've had so much loss and tragedy in my life. And God has put so much in place to help us from within. So we could be nowhere near what we see people in the world going through. Jesus came so we can have a victorious life of faith. We can have love and hope in a dark, broken world. We can experience the goodness of God. We can have peace. We can have comfort. Move forward into the future knowing God is good, life is good. The future can be good. And we're all going to have to make choices. And to all my friends out there in other faiths, other religions, other spiritualities, atheists, agnostics, Buddhists, I love you all and I appreciate you. I appreciate the space you give me to share this faith that has gotten me through so much. A Jesus who has made an extraordinary difference in my life and many others around me. And just as the Apostle Paul said on Mars Hill, just want to share some information on what to many of you may be an unknown God. The depth of this faith you've never heard from a perspective before. And hear at least what the Bible truly says and the reality of what its impact could be. And so I want to close this segment and thank you all for tuning in to Answers from Mars Hill. I want to thank our sponsors, Motorcycle Mike, Mike Levine, the lawyer, Sharon Gillette, One Stitch at a Time, Kenny Wolfman Max, Wolfman Biker Leather, Strong Island Entertainment, Paradise Studios. Again, this is Pastor Ski of the Rushing Wind Biker Church. Our Sunday gatherings are at 5:30. And if you want to donate to this cause, donate to the movement or the show, you can donate at rushingwindbc.org. Click on donate, or you can text. Use your technology, use your phone, and text 631-352-7773. That's the end of our show. I'll see you next week. God bless, and let's have a conversation.